This is the CCW Digital Speaker Spotlight Series. As always, I'm Brian Cantor, Principal Analyst for CCW Digital, and your host for today's discussion. In our recent CCW Digital Executive Profile, and frankly, in just about any conversation you're going to have within the industry, executives within the customer contact space identified putting customer satisfaction on the scorecard as a top sign of the contact center of the future. A sign that the organization has evolved from those days of just counting efficiency, just looking to contain costs, and really embrace the role the contact center plays and must continue to play in driving satisfaction, delivering a truly high quality experience, one that doesn't just handle the transaction okay, but actually builds a meaningful connection with the customer and really elevates that customer experience. But as much as we like talking about it, as much as we like citing statistics about why it's important, when push comes to shove, so many organizations are struggling to actually build a meaningful quality scorecard that accounts for these new factors, that accounts for the evolving role of the contact center. It's time to get this right. It's time to build a blueprint for a quality assurance program that truly is customer-centric. That lets us feel comfortable about the way we're managing our contact center, not just because we can look at quantifiable factors and we can drive performance and manage workflow, but because we know we're calibrating our efforts around what truly matters to the customer and therefore what truly matters to the business. Now at CCW Vegas this June 24th through 28th, it's our 20th anniversary of the event. Really building a more customer-centric contact center, looking at quality is going to be a huge factor. And one of our speakers is going to be Lexi Emmons of Bright Horizons, walking through how they have actually figured out how to start to revamp and evolve their quality scorecard. But Lexi's here with us today, so you don't have to wait all the way until June to get those great opinions. So Lexi, how's everything going?
It's going great. I'm excited to be talking to you.
I'm excited to have you as well. Thrilled you're going to be joining us in Vegas. The event is stacked from top to bottom. We have people such as yourself. We have Magic Johnson on the agenda. We have a talented faculty covering all kinds of brands and really going to be some great discussions. And one of those, of course, is going to be around quality. So I want to jump in. I mentioned, I hyped up that within your organization, you really look at a revamped approach to quality assurance. And so I'm wondering just at the high level, why is this updated or revamped approach to quality so important for today's customer contact or customer experience team?
I always love this question, and at the same time, I always approach it with a little bit of, amusement. I think I would start with things change and people change, and I think most importantly in those two conversations, their context changes. So what was true for somebody yesterday isn't the same thing that's true for them today. And we think of that a lot of times in terms of technology, and certainly technology has had a massive effect on our world. But the context is bigger than just someone's technology or the phones they have in their pocket. The context is also about where they're at in life, where they're at on their own journey, what their situation is with their own finances, what their situation is with whatever's going on politically. So there's a lot that changes someone's life and journey and their emotional state, and we absolutely have to change with it. I like to think of customer experience as sitting down and having a cup of coffee with all 100,000 of my friends. But if I sat down every week and asked the same questions in the same way, it would go from being patronizing to being insulting. Yet that's the same thing we're doing a lot of times with our quality assurance programs. So I think it needs that personalized touch that always changes.
And now, is that just a fear-based thing? Is that because we're afraid of the unknown, or is it because we're just stuck in our old ways? What allows us to, clearly the example you gave illustrates why that redundant, repetitive, never-changing scorecard is a problem. And I'm trying to get a sense of what kind of prevents us from making these changes.
I think we get busy. I think there's the components of everything you've said in there. There's the fear component and everything else. But more than anything, contact centers work at a frenetic pace and are always busy and always fighting for identifying the very best thing from all the good things that they could do. I think it's hard for something that's like this that ends up being so revolutionary to a process to sometimes get the footing that it needs to. So busyness is probably the primary thing that gets it. It just has to be prioritized if we want to get to where we want to be.
Now, when I threw out, and we both discussed the busyness, we threw out the inertia, the organizational factors, and of course those are at play. They're always in play in business and certainly within the contact center. But I don't just want to blame it on organizational dynamics, because I can tell you I've had conversations with contact center leaders who they fully understand the value of a more dynamic, more human scorecard. But then when it comes time to actually build it, they struggle to figure out exactly how to start to quantify some of these human factors, things like empathy or emotion. And so then that naturally leads them to revert back to the easy, conventional call center metrics. And so how do we break that cycle? How do we get to the point where, yes, it may be challenging, it may require a lot of critical thinking, but really how can we start to quantify some of these challenging yet so relevant factors like empathy, like emotional buy-in?
Yeah, so I'm going to say something that is going to sound like heresy, I think, to a lot of people who are in the space. But the first thing is to let go of the quantification to some degree. We want to boil everything down to a binary yes or no. Did they do it? Did they not do it? And quite frankly, human interactions have a much higher degree of subjectivity in them. So you have to start from a perspective of accepting some subjectivity into the process that you'll be using. And then it's really just a matter of getting started. So if you can describe what you think you want your calls to sound like. So do you want them to be warm? Do you want them to be professional? Do you want them to be fun? There's a variety of words that we could use that don't have real strong definitions that carry through every interaction. But you can still measure it. You can still ask, at the end of this call, did the customer feel like they had a warm interaction with us? And then I think we can begin to define from there why we think they did or why we think that they did not. I would suggest one of the things that's a key to making this happen is to put someone who has a high emotional intelligence on the project for you, and then teach them how to quantify things. But start from the perspective of capturing and understanding the emotional context.
Now, it's hard for me to argue with that. You made some great points there, but I also know at the end of the day, we're numbers-driven people. We report to numbers-driven people within the overall business. And so it's going to be important to have some metrics and some quantification. So what are some alternative metrics you would recommend that better reflect where we are and where we're trying to be as a contact center?
So I would give two things. One, I think you can, some of what we just talked about, you can make up the metric that fits for your organization and that fits for your organization's vision. So while we have all these performance targets that we're looking at, if the organization is really bought into the idea that we should have good customer service or good customer experience, and they define that in some way. For instance, our customer experience is very personable. It is fine to have even a fairly top-line level metric that says what percentage of our calls did we make personable, and that would have to be evaluated by someone. And again, there's that level of subjectivity in there that forwards and enhances the conversation. I think we get afraid to do that type of thing because we're worried about the conversation that comes out of that subjective nature. What if everybody doesn't agree with me? What if somebody sees warmth as being something different or friendly as being something different? But we forget that that is actually the conversation we're trying to make happen. So the process of having that as a metric and refining it further along, in whatever form we want to put it, gets us much farther along. So I think we can do that. And then I would say in addition to that, whenever we can get a CSAT or an NPS or some level metric directly down to the agent level with the customers verbatim, I think that moves our organizations farther quicker. If we want our culture to change, if we want what people are doing to change, we have to give them the direct feedback of the outcome of those efforts. Then we have to be open to what makes our customers happy, even if it wasn't in our design playbook originally. And I think we see a lot of that once we can get direct measurement down to the individual contact center consultant.
No, I think a lot of what you said, at least philosophically, aligns with what's really been a narrative within the customer contact community for a while, and that is the old school, the traditional efficiency metrics did not capture these human customer-centric factors that actually are far more meaningful when it comes to the relationship you have with those customers, to agent satisfaction, and to the overall health and market share that your business is able to generate. That said, even those who were opposed to efficiency metrics, they did point out one reality, is that when you're measuring toward very particular things like handle time, call count, it makes it easy to optimize your budgets, your forecasts, be able to map your workflow. That is an advantage to having very hard efficiency-based metrics. So if you start to cultivate a more customer-centric, a broader, more dynamic approach to quality, how do you do that in a way that not only doesn't compromise performance, but doesn't compromise your ability to plan for workflow?
That's a really good question, and I think that's where we have very established metrics like you just talked about that have been used now for 30, 40, 50 years across different industries and have now become, just these things that we come to rely and depend upon all the time. Whereas when you're operating in the CX space, you're operating in a very front of the wave type space where you're trying to get some of this done really just on your own desk and in your own time. Your organization and you believe in customer experience for a reason. There's the feel-good part of it, certainly, but it's because you believe ultimately that's the right move for your customers and increases your business. The next step in that has to be, okay, to what degree and why? I can tell you how we've done it in some of the organizations I've worked for. If you're talking about a service, there's a good chance that customers with high scores are going to use your service far more frequently than customers with low service. And once you've calculated what the difference is in those rates, then you start to have a use case for justifying the extra time, the extra money spent on that customer service aspect of it.
Definitely. Now, one of the things when we talk about this discussion, it's often framed as it's good for the agent, right? We subscribe to this belief that the typical agent doesn't like being measured based on very rigid numerical call times, call counts, those sorts of things. They want the ability to engage and really deliver great experiences for customers. They want some unpredictability and some leeway and some freedom. But we never consider the other side, right? And that is that most experienced contact center agents right now, they've long been conditioned to think about their work through these pure efficiency, very restrictive means. They think about call count and handle time. And so how, whether it's through training, whether it's through coaching, whether it's through culture, can we get these experienced agents who we do in theory want answering our calls because they do have the experience, they do know how to work within the environment. How do we get them to break from those habits and start to focus on this more dynamic, holistic experience?
So I think there's two levels to that we have to talk about. Contact centers are very interesting places because there's not really much else in the world where we can measure so many aspects of what a person is doing down to the second and evaluate and provide feedback on that. So contact center consultants work in an environment that is just full of scrutiny. So high level, the habits that contact center consultants have, they have for reasons. They were created by patterns, and so long as we repeat those patterns or reinforce those patterns, they're going to continue to be true. If we swap out new patterns, so we start measuring new things, we provide feedback on new things, we incentivize and talk about new things, those patterns will break. The most important thing we can do is make that old pattern not work anymore for them. If they continue to receive praise, though, because they've got a low AHT or a low handle time or something, then they're going to continue the pattern because it's what's working. They learned it because it worked. I think the second part of that conversation is it doesn't matter what you as a leader are shouting from the bullhorn or telling once a month in the all-hands meeting. What your frontline managers are telling them and what your frontline supervisors are telling them is what's going to matter to them because that's where they experience the pain and the reward on a daily basis. So if you're talking about customer experience up top, but your frontline person goes back to AHT because it's what they know and it's easier, then that pattern's going to continue. So you have to have your frontline managers bought into and built in the vision that you've got and also support them with whatever coaching or tracking you have put in place.
Makes sense. Now, another factor, though, is technology, and for a few different things. I mean, obviously, we talk about how technology is changing the way customers interact with us as businesses, but then there's also the impact on how it helps agents perform. You know, it changes the workflow they have, changes their capabilities and their ability to deliver and see how they're performing. So when you think about things like defining a great experience, establishing metrics, and then actually measuring and optimizing performance, what is really the role of technology right now?
It's a varied question, and one of the things I think is important to put out here, because I see so many organizations that are trying to start this journey, but they think there's a gigantic technological hurdle to getting there. Technology certainly enhances this conversation and takes us farther. But before we get there, no one should see any given technology that they have as a limitation to starting this journey in this conversation. I've done a lot of things with duct tape and bubble gum, and sometimes that's where you have to start, and that's okay. Now, having said that, there are some major developments in technology that I'm very excited about that really change the nature of the conversation and let us leverage the contact center consultant to do what people are good at and let tech do what tech is very good at. I think two things I'm really excited about. Just-in-time knowledge management is increasingly the way we are giving information to our consultants so that they can stay focused on the conversation they're having with the person on the other end of the phone. And that's where people excel, that person-to-person connection. But when we stick them behind a screen where they have to read through a manual for forever to answer a question, it takes away from all that person-to-person connection. The other thing I really like that's more and more in development is the real-time sentiment, or sentiment analysis even, that goes backwards, but sentiment analysis where we can understand from just different models that have already been built how our agents are portraying themselves, how customers are feeling and reacting and feeling at the end of our calls. So I think those are technologies that we can leverage to get a lot more done a lot quickly once we get to that stage of the game.
Well, Lexi, I want to thank you so much for walking us through all this. It's great to hear an organization that isn't just talking about how it wants to start thinking about the customer, how it wants to start making the customer experience the goal of its contact center, but is actually thinking about ways to doing it. And I don't think you pretend to have all the answers or have everything right. I don't think any good organization should. But I think what you've done is you've said, you know what, we need to start taking actions. We need to really start thinking about what's happening within our organization and what ramifications that has for our agents and for our customers. And you're certainly on the right track there. And I know that those who attend CCW Vegas this year are going to be able to get a lot more out of you in terms of specific recommendations and insights and just ideas for turning your contact center quality mechanism into a measurement of customer satisfaction, a measurement of developing brand advocacy, as opposed to just a measurement of did your agent answer 81 or 80 calls that day.
Yeah, I'm excited for the conversation to continue, both at Vegas and throughout, so this will be great.
Definitely, and if you're not joining us yet, if you haven't signed up yet, what are you doing? This is the 20th anniversary of the largest customer contact conference in the world. We have great speakers this year, as we do every year. And perhaps most importantly, we have so many great attendees, people from all kinds of organizations, the IT side, the contact center side, the customer experience side, the marketing side, who are all after the same thing, building better relationships with customers and figuring out what they need to do operationally, what they need to do design-wise to make that happen. So there's going to be so many great conversations, so much to learn, so much to do. We can't wait to see you out there in Vegas. And for CCW Digital, this has been Brian Cantor.